The great hall glittered with chandeliers as nobles feasted, their laughter ringing like silver against stone, while at the far end, a maid in plain linen dared to lift her chin. "I speak 9 languages," she declared, her voice steady, her eyes unyielding. The prince burst into laughter, his golden sash gleaming as he mocked the audacity of a servant who should have bowed and stayed silent. But when her gaze met his, and the truth of her brilliance flashed unmistakably, his smile faltered, setting the stage for a revelation that would shatter every rule of the court. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The study did not want the morning. Heavy curtains held the light in check, and the smell of ink clung to the air like a warning. Papers elbowed one another across the great desk, some folded with care, others muddied by a restless hand. The prince sat behind them, with his coat still unbuttoned and his shoulders square like a man bracing for surf. He had slept little. He had tried to make every line tidy and every thought obedient. A crown teaches a man to feign calm, but his jaw betrayed him each time it tightened. He touched the silver bell once, then thought better of it. The secretary was ill, truly ill, not a convenient absence, and that left him, a future king, alone with the languages of Europe and the precision they demand. He'd written a salutation in French, paused at the second clause, and found the word refusing him. He tried German and found the word he knew but not the form he needed. He tried Italian and then drew a hard line through the page. Each failure made a soft tearing sound and a louder ache. Servants moved like soft shadows against the shelves. They dusted. They set a tray down and left it untouched. No one spoke to him. No one would. He had the look that warned away pity. He gathered a new sheet, steadied it, and lifted his pen. It did not steady. The thought of ambassadors waiting in guest apartments, fanning out their standards and shining their shoes, made the room smaller. The thought of the council's faces if letters went unsent made it smaller still. He bent to the French again, frowning at the phrase that needed the exact degree of warmth. Not too friendly, not too cold. A word to hold peace inside it. He put down agreeer, and then, doubting the arrangement, crossed it out. Ink pooled. He watched it soak the paper and creep toward the margin. He put the pen aside and flexed his fingers as if the answer hid in the knuckles. From the carpeted silence came the smallest sound. A feather brush meeting wood, a careful hand adjusting a curtain edge. The maid at the far shelves had been in the study for a quarter hour. He realized it only because she had not created any trouble for him, and therefore had not been noticed at all. She moved without the clumsiness of the young or the punishment of the old. Her cap was neat, the simple dress scrubbed clean, her posture without apology. He would not have remembered her face if asked. He could not now decide why he had noticed it. He returned to the page. If the letters did not go before noon, the palace would be behind the rhythm a kingdom kept when it needed friends. The rain last night had left damp in the corridors and a cold smell in the chimneys. He felt it in his wrists. He reached again for the pen, found his hand wanting, and forced it anyway. Pride rode his spine like armor. Pride is not always vice, sometimes it is threshold. He read through what he had drafted to the Prussian envoy and found the tone too blunt. He softened it, then saw it become weak. He set his jaw. He could imagine exactly what the secretary would say, no, what the old man would do, lean in and lower his voice and suggest a single verb that left no offense behind it. It was not a marvel to select the right verb. It should not be a marvel. The prince rubbed his brow until the room blurred, and when he blinked it clear again, a drop of ink had fallen to the blotter instead of the paper. Stupid. He wiped it with a square of clean linen, then left the stained cloth where it fell. Footsteps crossed the corridor and passed the door. He ignored them. The silence after sounded too loud. He gathered a second sheet, blank as a dare, and felt the day lean on him with the casual weight of expectation. He fixed his gaze on the space 3 inches above the paper, where the next word would be, and waited for it to appear of its own accord. Nothing. He lowered his eyes. A shadow shifted at the edge of his sight. The maid moved another book, set it straight, and stood perfectly still as one does when deciding whether to speak. He did not look up. He did not welcome interruptions. He did not welcome help. The pen scratched, paused, scratched again. A line broke in the middle. He turned the point in his fingers and tested its bite. The secretary always sharpened his quills to a softness that floated, not dragged. He should have sent for the steward. He should have swallowed all that pride and sent. But to send would be to admit that the prince could not manage a simple letter without his nurse. He breathed deeply once, twice. The air tasted of paper dust and brass. Your Highness. The voice was quiet enough to be decorous and firm enough to be heard. He looked up without hiding his irritation and found the maid not where she had been, but 2 paces closer to the desk. Her hands joined, her eyes steady in a way that made him aware of his own. "This is important," she said, stopping short of any presumption. "If the letters must go today." He lifted a hand, and the words stopped in her throat. "I am aware of what must go today," he said, too sharp, then softened it. "I am aware." She took a breath. He watched the breath. Behind her, the window hinted at winter light. He had never seen that color on her face before, because he had never looked long enough to tell any faces apart below a certain rank. The thought embarrassed him. He did not know where to put his embarrassment, so it stiffened into coolness. "If there is trouble with the French," she said, "I can help. You can dust." He gestured to the shelves. "And you can fetch a coal scuttle." "I do not require—" "I can write the French," she said, and the room seemed to alter its angle. "And the German, the Italian if needed, and the Russian. There are others." He stared, and in staring found a part of himself that wanted to laugh because laughter is a barrier. "There are others," he repeated, as if tasting the absurdity could dissolve it. "Of course there are." Her fingers pressed against each other. It was the only outward sign she knew what her offer sounded like. "9, she said, and stood under the claim as if holding a tray that could tip. "I can speak 9 languages." The laugh broke from him genuinely then, not cruel, but quick and startled and intimate with disbelief. It came from the hollow the morning had scraped in him. He shook his head, and a lock of hair fell across his brow, and he did not push it back. 9, he said. "Impossible." "No," she said. "Not impossible." He set the pen down with care. An impulse rose to dress her down for impertinence, to remind her of the shape of the world and her place in it. The impulse collapsed as soon as he felt it, seemed petty even to himself. He looked instead for a seam in the moment where he could close this without crushing her. He found nothing. He had the tired, stubborn certainty of a man who has run out of elegant solutions. "How many letters?" she asked, eyes straight on his. Her voice was not the voice of a child reciting. It had weight. "How many before noon?" He told himself to end it, to dismiss her kindly, to return to the paper and wrestle it until it yielded. His pride and his duty wrestled in his chest with no judge to separate them. She took one small step closer to the desk. "If you dictate," she said, "I can shape it. If you show me the topic, I can place the courtesies properly. If you need corrections, I can offer them." He watched her as a man watches a clock whose hands have accelerated. He did not know this maid. He did not know her past. He did not know what use she could be beyond the claims she had dared. He did know that his hand had trembled, and his mind had failed, and his temper had frayed. He did know that the paper was still blank. "What would you say," he asked, not entirely knowing he was asking, "to open to a French envoy who values rigid propriety?" She did not answer at once, and then she did, and the answer was calm. He did not write it down. He listened. His face did not show surprise, but the surprise touched the inside of him, light as a fingertip. "Say another," he said. "German this time, same shape, different spine." She did. He felt the spine. He looked for the trick and found none. Far wall. Deep breath. The silver bell waited untouched, and he looked at it and wanted to ring it for the sheer pleasure of ringing, of admitting in the sound that the morning had bent him and now he would bend back. He reached instead for a blank piece and slid it to the edge of the desk. He did not yet give it to her. He waited to see whether her poise would break from his silence. It did not. He leaned back and let the chair creak, then leaned forward again as if he hated the sound it made. We cannot both stand here, he thought, like two stubborn statues. Someone must move. He watched her hands, small and sure. He watched the line of her shoulders, held straight through fear. He felt the curious, dangerous warmth of respect. He picked up the pen. 9, he said under his breath, a private challenge. Prove 8. 7 would save you time, she said, and he almost smiled, though nothing in this was a joke. His gaze fell to the unopened letters, to the mottled blotter, to the shimmer of drying ink on his fingers. He thought of the evening before when he'd spoken to a duchess whose words concealed a trap, and had stepped over it without noticing. Later he'd been told the step had been lucky. He did not feel lucky now. He felt something else. Come here, he said. She came. He placed the French draft where she could see it, not in her hand, on the desk, between them, like a test. There, he said. Fix what is wrong. She looked quickly, as if the eye had its own tongue with which to taste error. This verb is fine, she said, but the order needs grace. She offered a version. He nodded before he could stop himself. She did not gloat. She moved to the next point. This phrase is cordial, but too familiar. With the title you use here, better to, she suggested. He hesitated, and then nodded again. She returned the page to exactly the place where it had been. If you prefer, I can write as you speak. He picked up the pen and looked at his hand holding it. He did not recognize the hand for a moment. He let the pen rest. Speak, he said, and the word came out softer than he intended. Her face altered in that small way the face does when a thought is allowed to pass. She did not smile, but the idea of a smile grazed the corner of her mouth. She began to outline the letter, the bones first, then the muscle, then the skin. She spoke French with the even warmth that never tripped, German with the measured gravity that did not sink, Italian like sunlight arranged into sentences. Each was formal without being stiff. Each placed him where he needed to stand. He felt the ground under him grow firmer with each version. Where, he asked, though the question had not been planned. Did you learn to do this? Everywhere I have had to be small, she said, and that was all. For a few minutes, the study became a narrow bridge joining two cliffs. On one side, the prince who could not ask for help. On the other, the maid who could not be seen helping. They walked out to meet in the middle without looking down, the air between them charged with the danger of being witnessed by a careless eye pressed to the keyhole. He knew it. She knew it. No one said the word scandal. The word sat like a guest no one had invited and no one dared send away. He lifted his hand to drag it through his hair, then set it back down. Only the pen moved. You said 9. He told himself it was only a check, only a test. Name them. French, she said. German, Italian, Russian. She paused, a half heartbeat. And others. He looked up quickly. Which? She breathed differently. He noticed. Enough to send these, she said, and the answer was evasive and true at once. He found himself wanting another of her small surprises, the quiet ones, the kind that make the day feel rescued by cleverness rather than force. It irritated him that he wanted that. It warmed him too. He pushed one sheet toward her with the heel of his hand. The paper made a soft sighing sound against the wood. He did not know what possessed him to do it. He had decided a moment ago that she would not touch the royal drafts. But possession was the wrong word. Nothing possessed him. He had decided. The decision made itself. He watched her eyes move to the crest at the top of the page and then deliberately away, as if to spare him the proof that she noticed such symbols and was careful of them. Her fingertips hovered a breath above the margin, close enough to feel the fibers, far enough not to claim ownership. "If I may," she said. "If you can," he said. She straightened a little. It was all she needed. She spoke first in French. Not a recital, but a living phrase that opened the letter in the tone he had hunted and failed to trap. He wrote it as she spoke, the pen suddenly obedient. She shifted into German without preface, calibrating formality like a lens. The words sat where they ought to sit, and he felt something inside him unclench. She did not rush. She did not falter. English returned only to stitch between one and the next. He told himself to be cool. He found himself leaning forward a fraction. He told himself this was a tool he would need for an hour. He found himself watching her mouth shape sounds he had only studied on the page, and the attention felt intimate in a way that startled him. He took a breath to push that away and nearly inhaled the scent of soap from her sleeves. "Russian," he said, almost to see if he could shake her. She answered him with the consonants arranged like ironwork, beautiful and strong. He wrote the example down, not because he would send it, but because he needed to see the shapes appear under his hand as if by incantation. He felt foolish thinking of magic. This was no magician. This was a woman who had learned, who had hidden the extent of it, who had decided to risk revealing it now. He respected the risk more than he would admit. A servant crossed the far end of the room behind them, and both of them stilled without looking. He waited. She did not turn. The servant passed. The study regained the privacy of a held breath. He knew the rule. Keep his world in order, keep his hands clean, keep his distance from anything that could be named irregular. The rule sat on one side of his mind. On the other, the weight of the day and the fact of her competence. He chose the fact. He did not say so. He did not need to. The pen in his fingers declared his choice for him each time it moved at her prompting. His voice dropped. "You said 9, he murmured, as if drawing courage from repetition. "Prove them." She did not roll out a list. She stepped toward the edge of the impossible and put her foot down like a person who trusts a plank on a stormed pier. The French flowed again for a sentence and then slid, not into English, not into the German he had expected, but into a different music altogether, one he had only ever read when studying maps. He felt his scalp prickle. He had not asked for that. He had not known to ask. He glanced at the door, imagining the wrong person entering and hearing what should not be heard, and found his heart kicking once, hard. She moved on, seamlessly, to another tongue he could not name except by the way it bent around the soft consonants. The room shrank. The clock, which had been silent all morning, seemed to cough once and fall quiet again. He watched her face as much as he listened, searching for effort, for any sign of fear at her own boldness. He found none, only centered calm and a quiet pride that did not reach her mouth. He tried to laugh again and found he could not. He tried to find the boundary where disbelief could keep him safe. It had moved. It had moved because she had moved it. His hand, still holding the pen, loosened. The nib tapped the blotter. The light finally tasted the room through the edge of the curtain and touched the crest on the paper with a blink of white. He hardly noticed. He did notice the space between them, and how it did not feel like the space between a prince and a maid in that exact second. It felt like the space between two minds who could meet in the middle of a sentence. Dangerous, he thought, and then did not think it again because he could not afford to. She finished a phrase in that second unfamiliar tongue, and before he could catch his breath, let the sound shift once more, clean as a key turned in an oiled lock. He recognized that one too late, and the recognition startled him, and the word he had been holding in his mouth fell. He stared at her. She held his gaze for half a heartbeat, and then let it go, as if not to trap him with it. He realized then that her skill was less a display and more a promise. She could do this. and she could do it without humiliating him. She could make him look as he ought to look. He could not remember the last time anyone had offered him a promise without attaching a demand. His grip slipped on the pen. A dot of ink marked the blotter like a small eclipse. He did not wipe it. He did not speak. Her voice changed again, and with it the room, and with it his certainty, until his own laughter seemed suddenly miles behind him. A creature belonging to another hour, another man, a poorer one. He looked at the door. He looked at her. He understood he had misjudged everything. The pen slid slightly in his fingers as the maid's voice moved into a language he barely recognized, and the study fell into a silence so complete he heard only the shape of his own breath. The pen had slipped. The room had stilled. He heard only her voice, then the absence of it, and in that absence he made a choice he could not yet name. He gestured once to the far stack of drafts, then to the narrow table beside the window. "Bring me the German," he said, as if the command belonged to every morning of his life. "The draft to the minister." She crossed the carpet without hesitation. Her skirt brushed the leg of a chair and made a small, whispering sound. She returned with the sheet he meant, the one he had tried and abandoned. He did not hand it to her. He set it down on the desk between them, his finger firm on the margin. "Read," he said, quietly. She obeyed. Her gaze ran down the lines, and he watched her eyes move the way one watches a blade being inspected for nicks. She did not stumble on the grammar. She did not pause at the nested clause that had caught him. She reached the end and lifted her head. He kept his posture indifferent. "Corrections?" "The address can remain," she said, her voice neutral. "But the second sentence must not use that verb in this form. It will sound like a command, not an entreaty. Also, the honorific is misapplied. For this minister, the compound form is needed." "You are certain?" "Yes." "Show me." She asked for a fresh sheet. He hesitated, then tugged one from the stack and slid it to her side of the desk. The whiteness of the paper made his throat feel tight. He told himself this was still a test. He did not give her the pen. He did not need to. "Write it," he said, pushing the pen across the wood to a point where she could reach without stepping farther into the space that felt like his alone. She did not reach. "Better if you write," she said. "It preserves your hand." A flicker of relief moved through him. He took up the pen and held it poised. "Then speak." She began, and he wrote as she spoke, the quill catching her cadence and making it ink. She did not dictate a translation word by word. She gave him the structure as if she could see the whole letter laid on a table, cut and assembled without seams. He kept pace. When she corrected a word, she did it gently, like moving a glass away from the edge of a shelf. He noticed and did not say so. He finished the sentence and held the pen above the paper, waiting. She gave him the close, the one that would keep the door open and the dignity intact. He added it. He read it back silently and felt the simple rightness of it in his mouth. He looked at the draft, then at her. "Again," he said. "French." Her gaze flicked to the pile. She found the French draft, that formal welcome to a man whose pride was a second spine. He slid a new sheet forward and dipped the pen. She spoke the salutation with exact warmth and adjusted the phrase he had botched by removing one word and shifting another. The sentence breathed. He could feel the breath. He wrote it down. A rattling outside the door made them both still. He did not look up at once. He forced his attention to the line. He signed the page with only his initial for now, then set it aside to dry. When the sound faded, he exhaled. "You know the proper close to the ambassador of France?" he asked. His tone was cool. It concealed a plea. "Yes," she said. "Not the one for Paris society, the one for the court." "Say it." She did, with a slight bow of the head toward the very idea of rank. He caught the final turn and wrote the exact words she used. "You have studied etiquette," he said. "I have needed to know the shape of rooms where I am not seen," she answered. The line cut neat and true. He nodded once and reached for the Italian, the brief, courteous acknowledgement that would keep a relationship easy. He wanted to test her by speed. He wanted to catch her where she could not move with grace, if only to restore a little of himself. "Make it light," he said, "but not foolish." She did. And the lightness did not make a sound like bells. It sounded like a well-oiled hinge. He wrote, line after line, and the ink sat clean on the page as if it had been meant to be there all morning and had only waited for this moment to arrive. The door opened a fraction. A servant's cap appeared and then withdrew. The door closed. He heard murmurs in the corridor, the kind that try not to be heard. He ignored them, because he must. "For Russia," he said, forcing his tone to be bland, "do not be overbold." "Never," she said, "not to begin." He prepared another sheet and kept his spine against the chair back, as if the wood were holding him in place. She gave him the formal Russian opening. He wrote the Cyrillic characters by memory, and faltered. The pen hesitated on a curve. He had not written it in a month. He could see the letter, but his hand did not remember the angle. "Allow me," she said, taking a step nearer, stopping again as if aware of the boundary. "Say it. I will write it in Russian. You can copy after." He did not let go at once. A second passed in which pride crossed his face, visible enough to shame him. He laid down the pen and pushed it toward the edge of the desk. She reached. The pen looked too large in her hand for a moment, and then it did not. She wrote cleanly, her wrist quiet, the strokes confident. He watched her write the very word that had stalled him, and felt something like gratitude knock against his ribs. A cough sounded in the hall, the deliberate kind that announces presence. He did not call enter. He waited. The cough was not repeated. The footsteps did not fade, but they moved away. He took the pen back without their fingers touching. She withdrew her hand quickly, as if she felt heat there. The sensation of almost touch hung uselessly in the air between them, an irrelevant, precise fact. He copied what she had written under her example, training his hand to the correct weight. She observed without comment. He found that mercy almost painful. "You could write these entirely," he said. He meant it as a question and a statement both. "I could," she said, "but then they would be mine before they are yours. And they must be mine." "Yes." The air held that word for a beat, and then let it fall. A deeper murmur rose outside the door, different from the servant's whispering tones. It carried the shape of authority even muffled by wood. He felt the familiar stiffness gather in the base of his neck. He did not wish to be seen with her at the desk. He did not wish to be seen without her at the desk. He told himself to marry the necessity to the appearance. "Stand back," he said softly. She did, taking only 2 steps, her hands returning to the posture of a maid who waits to dust. The distance looked like obedience and felt like complicity. He stacked the pages she had shaped. He should have sealed none of them yet without rereading, but he did not have time for ceremony. He read each quickly, finding no fault that mattered. He placed them in a neat pile and set a blotter between the fresh ink and his sleeve. "You've done this before," he said, his voice not asking, almost grateful for facts. "In other rooms," she said, "at other tables." He did not ask more. He would later. He hated himself for thinking later when it was not a word the day offered him. "Fetch the draft to the Austrian," he said, and she did, handing it to him carefully so their fingers would not touch. He adjusted the open, then gave her the subject in English to shape into Italian again. They found a rhythm there, his thought, her structure, his ink, her caution. The study became efficient in a way it had not been since his secretary had fallen ill. He felt his breath deepen, his pulse slow. The relief was a trap, but he stepped into it honestly. He needed the feeling to be steady. At the door, soft voices continued. He saw a shadow pause under the frame. "We will not be disturbed," he said, loud enough to be heard through the wood. "Leave the tray and go." A pause. then the whisper of feet retreating. The authority in his voice had felt easy and brittle at once. He was grateful to it and suspicious of it in the same second. She finished the Italian close with a phrase that would read like courtesy and sound like a reminder of favor. "That is clever," he said, betraying a sliver of admiration. "It is safe," she answered. He signed the draft with his full name, letting the ink sit in the grooves of his letters. Old ink over old power. He pressed the paper aside and reached for the seal, then frowned and drew back his hand. "Not yet," he said. "We may need to adjust." She nodded. They worked through another German. A Polish note was not demanded today. He pushed it aside. The study's clock ticked once and then stuck again, unwilling to serve. He checked the light at the curtain's edge. It had brightened just enough to make the gold on the spines of books wink. The day was moving faster than he could ask it to slow. "Your hand," she said when he finished a line too fast and made the ink catch. "Loosen at the end. The sweep becomes harsh if you tighten." He almost laughed at the absurd intimacy of a maid instructing a prince on the looseness of his hand. "You observe everything," he said. "I have to." "And what do you observe now?" "That the words are correct," she said, "and the time is wrong." He lifted his head. The clock confirmed it. He did not swear. He wanted to. A shadow passed the glass at the high part of the door. Not a servant, then. A moment later a knock came, firm and brief. He and the maid exchanged a glance that existed and vanished in the same breath. "Enter," he said. The door opened. A palace official, older, lean, with the posture of a man who files order into rooms the way others lay carpets, stepped inside and halted at the threshold. He took in the scene in one sweep. The prince at his desk, the papers aligned and unsealed, the maid standing not at the shelves but within a step of power. "Your Highness," the man said with a bow that was perfect and cool. His eyes rested not rudely on the perimeter of the desk. "I was told to deliver the morning report on household readiness." "You have delivered it," the prince said. "Leave it on the table." The man obeyed, setting a slim ledger on the side table. His face showed nothing, but his presence felt like a finger laid on a bruise. He held for a heartbeat longer than needed, as if listening. He stepped back. He bowed. He left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded, to the prince, like the end of a promise he had not made. "They saw," the maid said, almost dare say, almost regret. "They saw a maid in a study," he answered. "They saw nothing if I decide they saw nothing." Her chin lifted a fraction. "Decide it then." He returned to the drafts because anything else would be a kind of yield. He pushed an Italian aside, took another French. She watched him, then began again to give him the exact phrasing that bridged respect without surrender. The phrases fell onto the paper with the right weight. She adjusted when he tightened. He adjusted when she held too careful a distance. It had become a dance without music. He did not think that. He could see it anyway. Outside the door, footsteps again. Then silence. Then a quicker step that did not belong to a servant who knew how to walk softly. The knock came swift. He reacted without opening his mouth, his eyes cutting to the maid. She moved back a pace, folded her hands, assumed a stillness that made her presence unremarkable if one wished it so. "Enter," he said, making the word flatter than he felt. A messenger came in at a half-run, then checked himself and bowed with speed. His coat was damp. The morning fog had left its fingerprints on his sleeves. His breath showed faintly in the cold of the corridor behind him. "Speak," the prince said, standing. The messenger straightened and held his cap with both hands. "Your Highness," the man said, "several ambassadors have reached the city at first light. The carriages were seen at the south gate. They request acknowledgement upon arrival to their quarters." He swallowed, choosing the next sentence with care. "It is expected that letters of welcome should be received by evening. They will wait on your words before they make their calls." Evening. The word landed like a stone on the table and rolled. The prince placed a hand on the back of his chair to steady it, then took it away, as if even that could be read as weakness. "Who has arrived?" he asked. "The French envoy's staff," the messenger said. "Also the minister from the German states and a secretary from the Italian mission. Others are due by noon, but these have come ahead. How many letters must be prepared before they dine? At least 4 today, Your Highness, to be proper. More if others arrive before sunset." "Very well." He dismissed the messenger with a nod. "Tell the stewards to keep their attention on the guest corridors. See that none wait long for fire." The messenger bowed and withdrew. The door closed. The sound echoed too long. Silence filled its place. He did not break it at once. He stared at the drafts that lay like pale skins on his desk. The pile looked taller than it had a moment earlier. The room seemed to tilt. She did not speak. Her patience stood beside him like a second pair of shoulders. He felt it without needing to see her face. He could see her hand, though, steady where it rested light on the edge of the desk, ink stain darkening one fingertip. It was the only mark she wore of the work. "Evening," he said, almost to himself. "Today." She nodded. He looked at the French letter they had begun. He looked at the German correction. He thought of the Italian civility, the Russian caution. He thought of his own hand cramping by mid-afternoon, of every misstep magnified by 100 eyes, of a late letter traveling faster than rumor and failing to beat it. "Can you remain?" he asked, too blunt, too stripped of rank, then found the tone again. "Can you remain in the study until these are done?" "If you ask," she said. He looked at the door. He looked at the stack. He looked at the seal that waited at his right elbow like a verdict. He did not trust himself to speak admiration. He did not trust himself to speak fear. He took a breath that felt like swallowing river water and lifted his hand toward the papers, as if he could push them back with the gesture. The whisper of voices outside crept under the door and died. He felt the study hold its breath with him. He looked from the mountain of drafts to the calm steadiness of her ink-dark hand, and knew with a jolt that felt like defeat and relief together that she was his only chance. He did not say the words, "I need you." He lifted the top sheet instead and set it on the blotter like a gauntlet. "Begin," he said, and the syllable steadied him. She moved to the edge of the desk with the quiet certainty of someone stepping into a known pattern. The quill lay between them like the narrow bridge of trust they had agreed to cross. He dipped it, tapped off the excess, and nodded once. "For the French," he said, his voice low, "a welcome that speaks to dignity and to—" He searched the far wall a second. "Continuity." She gave him the spine of the sentence, then the proper ornaments, her cadence unhurried. He followed, translating her breath into ink. When she offered 2 endings, one more ceremonious than the other, he selected the one that would place him on even ground without kneeling. They tried the German. She cut a clause and replaced it with a construction that carried the same weight without the clumsy edge he had left in his first attempt. He saw the improvement in the space it created. "You make a kind of music of it," he said, surprising himself. "The courtiers call it a tone," she answered. "Music is truer." He dipped the quill again. The quill scratched, a sound like a train of thought. He found himself, absurdly, wanting the scratching to continue forever if it meant the room would keep this fragile order. At the sideboard, the sealing wax waited, already softened near the low fire. He had tested it earlier, pressing his ring's face into a drop to make sure the impression would hold cleanly. An accident of impatience had touched the corner of a blank sheet near the crest. The impression lay there now, a partial mark like a fingerprint, proof of his hand where it should not be. He would cut that corner later or burn the page entirely. He told himself that and let the thought move aside. He rotated his shoulder to ease the ache that came with holding authority too tightly. "Italian," he said. "Keep it cordial. He knows we need him. Do not let him think we cannot breathe without him. He already thinks it, she said. But we can make him enjoy thinking it. She shaped a sentence that read like a compliment and functioned like a leash. He wrote, aware of how much he was beginning to lean on that quiet mind, aware too of the risk of leaning this way where walls hear and people invent. A knock touched the door lightly, the kind meant to test if anyone is listening. He paused with the nib poised above the page. He did not want the sound to pull his attention out of the line he had just begun. He finished the clause first, then called, "Not now," as if the delay were a routine offense. The knock did not return. He laid the pen down and flexed his fingers. Her gaze dropped to his hand, then away again, a brief attention that felt like the touch of a cloth on a bruise. "Your hand will not thank you by evening," she said. "My hand has never thanked me," he replied. "It obeys." He picked up the quill again, before the honesty of the reply could give them both too much to think about. She did not smile. She did not need to. There was a slight ease in her shoulders. They adjusted a Russian sentence that insisted on a specific term of respect he had nearly missed. She corrected him without humiliating him, and he felt a strange relief that prickled at the back of his neck. He wrote the Cyrillic carefully, and did not look at her while he did it. "You are saving me," he said, too quietly for pride to object. "I am saving the letters," she said. "They belong to the crown." He let the phrasing stand as a courtesy not to her but to his own standing. The study settled into a rhythm that carried its own kind of intimacy. He spoke, she weighed, he wrote, she intervened only where necessary. When he reached for the blotting sand, she passed the dish before he asked. When she reached to adjust a page that had crept under his sleeve, he moved his arm in the last inch before they could touch. Each near contact sounded like glass singing. Neither remarked on it. Both noticed. The little fire clicked and sighed. A coal settled. He thought stupidly of how often noise in a quiet room feels like a witness. "French close," he said. "The lawful one, not the fashionable one." She gave it. He added it, feeling the satisfaction of rightness ripple along his wrist. They were not alone. The building never let anyone be alone. He heard the patrol of a guard pass the corridor, the even stamp of boots like punctuation. The footsteps paused. A shadow leaned across the bottom of the jam, as if the guard's curiosity had changed his route by half a pace. She breathed out, a small strand of air through a narrow throat. Her gaze flicked to the gap under the door, then to him. He did not want to see alarm on her face. He did not see it. He saw calculation instead. He lifted his voice slightly, enough for corridor ears, and said, "Leave the decanter. I do not require more wine now." "Yes, Your Highness," she answered with the exact tone of a maid instructed to tidy a table rather than advise on statecraft. She moved 2 glasses to the left and straightened a tray they had not used. Her hands touched polished metal, creating the small, harmless clink that tells a passerby nothing contraband is happening. He bent his head to the page as if absorbed by the shape of an initial. The guard's shadow shifted. The boots resumed their measured path. The echo faded. He felt his chest loosen. "Clever," he said under his breath. "I grew up near doors," she said. "I learned to listen for what passes them." The remark had marrow. He did not ask. He turned to the wax and checked its readiness by stirring it with the end of a clean stick. The surface moved like melted carmine. He tested a tiny drop on a scrap before committing to the first seal. Perfection could not be assumed. It must be proved. He could feel her eyes on his hands without looking. "Are you always this careful?" she asked. "Or only with the things that matter?" "Everything matters," he said, then winced inwardly at the sanctimony of the answer. "Enough matters," he amended. "More than the eye tells in a morning." They sealed the first French letter. He warmed the wax just enough, let it fall in a careful circle, then pressed his seal ring in with a measured weight and held for account that his secretary had taught him when the prince was 16 and impatient to prove something to somebody. He lifted the ring and found the crest perfect, lion and wreath clear, motto legible. He resisted the urge to show the perfection to her. She did not need it. He did. He placed the letter aside to cool. She did not reach toward it. She moved to the next sheet, aligning it so the signature line would not tempt a blot. They continued. He forgot to measure himself at times, forgot to groom his tone. He spoke to her like a man who did not need to rehearse every word. He caught himself twice and returned to form, but the truth persisted under the form now. His mind reached for hers each time he stumbled. "Shall we risk a lighter note with the Italian?" he said. "A phrase that nods to history." "So long as it does not look like you are asking to borrow their glory," she replied. "Offer a shared memory instead." He fed the line, one safe, one warm. She nudged it toward the exact temperature that would not burn. "Now the German, the second paragraph," he said, "about the schedule." "Be clear," she said. "Do not apologize for the order of events. State them. If they object, they can do so within the clear structure you set." He wrote it as she said it, grateful beyond measure not to be alone with his second guessing. A scrape at the door again. Not a knock, a slipper catching on a rough board. He went still. She stood as if her spine had been ironed. The handle turned a notch and stopped. The stop was worse than entrance. It suggested someone deciding. He could not allow a decision to be made out there. "Bring fresh sand," he said louder. "The ink is heavy." She crossed to the sideboard and lifted the small tin. She rattled it lightly as if checking content. The sound was domestic, innocent, boring. The handle released. The pause dissolved. The corridor breathed again. He let out a breath he had not been aware of holding. He did not pretend he had not been afraid. "You are very cool," he said. "I cannot afford to be warm," she answered. It was a joke without laughter in it. He permitted himself the ghost of a smile. He did not show teeth. Time thickened. The light inched along the curtain and made a ribbon on the rug. The fire dimmed. He added a small stick to it with his own hand, preferring the risk of ash on his cuff to ringing for anyone. He returned to the desk and found her watching the flame, then studying him as if measuring how far he would go to keep their work from eyes. "Do you trust me?" she asked suddenly. He set the sealing stick down. He did not answer at once, because the question had asked more than one thing. "I trust what you do," he said. "That is different." "It is what I have," he said. The honesty embarrassed him again. His face did not change. She gave a small nod that looked like coming to terms with a fair price, then turned back to the drafts and the neat pile of completed letters at the far corner. He counted them with a glance. 3 sealed, 2 drying, 1 half done waiting on the last phrase she had promised to think about while he worked through a German list of titles. He rubbed his thumb against the edge of the quill to keep the pressure sensitive. "French envoy," he said, a second sentence that acknowledges his recent illness without sounding like meddling. "A wish for strength to match his long service," she suggested, "and a line that this conference will not strain his recovery." He wrote the wish. It read like care, and not like presumption. He felt relief again, like water finding a channel cut for it. A guard's shadow returned to the door. This time the step did not pause. The guard passed without incident. The walking told him the palace still held its shape around them. "Seal these 2, he said. "Then we will make the copies." He warmed the wax and pressed the ring. She bent over the folded paper to ensure the edge sat flat under his hand, and her hair, neat under the cap, bared a line of neck that did not need noticing. He noticed. He became aware of his breath. He pretended he had only adjusted his stance to press the seal cleanly. He lifted the ring and set it aside with careful restraint. "Perfect," she said softly. "I do not accept less," he answered, "and I cannot afford it today." They tested the German list of honorifics against the new paragraph. She corrected one, explained the nuance in 2 words that did almost the same job. He saw the advantage of the correct one. It would prevent a counselor, 2 days from now, from twisting meaning to claim a promise that had not been made. "You see farther than the line in front of you," he said. "I was once punished for not seeing behind me," she said with a bare shrug. "It taught me to widen the mirror." He looked at her as if her face might reveal the story. It did not. He did not ask. He signed 2 letters and moved them to the pile with the care of a man stacking thin porcelain. Silence took them for a heartbeat. The kind that is not empty, but full of the same thought in both heads. He tamped it down. "Gather these," he ordered, back in armor. "Lay them by the door, ready for the page." She obeyed. She lifted each sealed letter with a precision that did not smudge the wax. Her palms made no sound on the paper. The stack looked like a promise kept. He returned to the last French draft and glanced at the header, crest engraved on heavy paper, a subtle glint when the light touched it. He would use this quality only for the most formal. He slid it into the center of the desk so he would not forget. A corner bore a faint scar where the warm seal had kissed it before its time. He did not like that the mark existed. He would fix it, later when he had hands free. "Is this the final to the German minister?" she asked, indicating the one he had signed but not sealed. "Not yet," he said. "We will read it once more." "We must not smudge," she said. "No," he agreed. "We must not smudge." Her glance flicked to the door. "Shall I call the page?" "Not yet," he said. "2 more, then we send them all together." She returned to the small table near the window to sort ribbon lengths to bind the bundles. He liked that she thought not just of ink and words, but of presentation, of how a letter arrives as a body as well as a voice. He liked too much. He took a breath and stepped away from the liking. "Give me the Italian close once more," he said. She did, and he wrote it quickly before the memory could fade. A footfall thudded outside, heavier, then faded. The palace shifted around them, the way a sleeping creature shifts under a blanket. He wanted to be done. He wanted to linger. "Now," he said at last, sifting the stack with the practiced motion of a man who must pretend he was always competent. "Gather them." She moved with purpose. She brought the finished letters back to the desk to align the edges. She set them in a neat bundle on the left. As she did, her sleeve brushed the far corner of the blotter. He pulled the pen back out of instinct. She murmured an apology that was not shame, but precision. He shook his head, dismissing it, his eyes already on the next sheet. The moment was small, trivial, the kind of moment that fills hours in a palace and leaves no trace. It would not have mattered except that the far corner of the blotter hid the crested, incomplete draft, the one with the partial seal mark like a wound. When her sleeve brushed it, the draft slid a finger's width into the shadow under the stack. When she lifted the cooled letters, her hands scraped the desk lightly and gathered not only the finished work, but the sheet beneath. He did not see it. He was cutting a ribbon with his pocket blade, too big a blade for the delicate task, and trying not to shred the silk. "Take them to the door," he said. "I will ring." She lifted the bundle. It was heavier than she expected. She adjusted her grip and felt the slight rasp of an extra sheet's rougher edge among the smoother folded letters. She thought it was the German copy paper and did not check. She moved to the door, each step careful, because one drop could crush all this. He set the blade aside and reached for the test page with the partial seal, the one he meant to destroy before anyone could mistake it for authority. His fingers met only the blotter's worn felt. He frowned, slid the blotter back, found nothing. "Where is the crested draft?" he asked, more to the room than to her. She turned her head at the door, the bundle balanced in her arms. "Which one?" "The incomplete. The one with—" He looked at the desk for the smear of wax he had noticed. A faint red smudge darkened the polished wood near the edge. His stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. The smudge drew his eye to the stack she held. He moved around the desk too fast and checked himself so his urgency would not call attention. "Bring them back," he said, calmer than he felt. "Set them down." She obeyed, placing the bundle on the corner where he indicated. He pressed the top down with his palm to keep the stack from sliding, and the heat of his hand warmed the paper without necessity. He began to separate the letters, one by one. He found the French. He found the German. He found the Italian. He found the Russian. He found an extra sheet, crested, heavy, not folded. His heart gave a warning knock. "Wait," he said, too late. She had already reached to lift the top half of the bundle again to tighten the ribbon. The extra sheet stayed pressed to the letters under it by static and small treachery. He slipped his hand under the corner, seeking the wrongness. The page eluded him like a thought that dissolves in light. He could see the edge of the crest, catching a whisper of sun. He could not catch the paper itself. From the hall came the definite rhythm of a guard returning. The handle moved half an inch. A throat cleared. If he delayed the sending at the door now, he would invite attention he could not afford. If he let the bundle go without checking, he would send out into the palace, into a corridor full of eyes, a draft that bore his mark without his words. He measured the danger and found no safe number. "Go," he said at last, the decision cutting him. "Go before the corridor fills." She lifted the bundle. He reached for the bell. His fingers brushed the silver and made it ring before he could temper it. The note hung too bright. The page in the hall would come. She glanced at him once as if to ask whether he was certain. He gave the smallest nod a man could give and still call it assent. She opened the door. He saw the faint red mark on the uppermost corner of the paper, tucked among the sealed letters only as the door widened and the light from the corridor fell across it like a reveal on a stage. He did not call out. He could not. She stepped into the corridor with the finished letters in her arms, and among them, hidden and vulnerable, lay the crested, incomplete sheet brushed by his seal. The corridor swallowed her. The door clicked closed, and silence pressed against the study walls. He stood with his hand still on the bell as if it could be forced to unsound what it had already rung. The image of that red smear burned in his mind, a single flaw that could unravel an entire morning's worth of rescue. He crossed the room once, then back again, his boots whispering against the carpet. His instinct was to follow her, to tear the bundle open before it reached the wrong hands. Yet to do so would have drawn questions sharper than any discovery. A prince running after a maid with letters, no explanation could cloak that. He forced himself still, gripping the edge of the desk until the wood bit into his palm. The door opened without warning. The chamberlain entered, his grey presence as sharp as steel polished too long. He bowed only with the neck, his eyes already fixed on the desk, on the wax stains, on the order that smelled too neat for a morning without a secretary. "Your Highness is diligent," the chamberlain said. His voice carried courtesy like a knife hidden under cloth. "I am told the letters are already being carried out." The prince gave a slight nod. "They are." "I am also told," the chamberlain continued, his gaze flicking toward the door the maid had used, "that unusual assistance has been observed near your study." The words landed like dropped stones. The prince straightened, his hand leaving the desk. "I require discretion. The palace is mine to order." "Discretion," the chamberlain echoed, stepping further inside, "is only effective when appearances align with it. When servants are seen bearing papers stamped with your seal, questions arise. Questions can spread quicker than answers." The prince's jaw tightened. "A servant carried them because my page was delayed. Nothing more." The chamberlain's expression did not shift. "So I shall report then." He paused, letting the air stretch thin. "Still, rumor is a poor horse to bridle once loosed." The prince crossed to the window, lifting the curtain just enough to glance at the courtyard below. Carriages waited in orderly rows, steam from their horses mixing with the pale light. Somewhere in that tangle of movement, the maid now walked unseen, carrying words that bore his mark. His throat tightened at the thought. "You may leave," he said. The chamberlain bowed again, just enough to make obedience appear respectful, and left without sound. The door closed. The prince let out a breath he had been holding since the man had entered. Downstairs, in the servants' passage, the maid walked steadily with the bundle. The letters seemed to grow heavier in her arms, though they were no more than folded paper. Each step she took brought her closer to the courier's table, closer to hands that would scatter these pages into the city. She knew the stakes. She had seen the prince's face when he realized something was amiss. She had felt the sharp edge of his unspoken warning. At the corner of the passage, 2 kitchen maids whispered. Their eyes caught the unusual sight, a housemaid carrying the royal crest in plain view. They said nothing, but the silence between them was louder than any gossip spoken. The maid adjusted her grip, kept her head level, and moved on. At the small hall where the courier waited, she set the bundle down. The man lifted one letter, checking the seal's firmness. His rough thumb brushed close to the crest, too close to the one page that did not belong. She held her breath, but he found no flaw in the first, set it back, and tied the stack with the ribbon she had arranged. "Ready," he muttered, more to himself than her. He carried the bundle away. The door shut behind him, leaving her alone in the hall. Her knees softened, though she did not let them bend. When she returned upstairs, the chamberlain stood waiting in the corridor. His eyes found her at once. He did not speak, but the pause in his glance said he had already decided how he would interpret her presence. She bowed, murmured the word, "study," and slipped past him, careful not to betray the rush of her heart. Inside, the prince sat at the desk again, his posture rigid as if carved there. When the door closed behind her, the tension dropped from his shoulders just slightly. "They are gone," she said quietly. "Yes," he answered. His voice was low, controlled. "Let us hope only the right words reach the right ears." The fire had dwindled. She crossed to stir it, the simple gesture cloaking the quickness of her breathing. Sparks leapt upward, brief and bright, like the risk they had just taken. She felt the prince's gaze on her back, but did not turn. The day wore on. Servants came and went, cautious in their glances. The prince's name hovered in their whispers, joined now with hers. The chamberlain passed once more, his steps measured, his face unreadable, but his eyes flicked toward the study as though counting the minutes the maid remained inside. By evening, the table had been cleared, the ink dried, and the drafts that remained lay sealed in their neat pile. The prince sat, one hand on the armrest, his expression drawn with the effort of keeping control. The maid, standing at the hearth, sensed the quiet walls, listening more closely than ever. At the great dinner that night, the atmosphere was colder than the candles suggested. The long table glittered with polished silver and crystal, yet every smile carried an edge. The ambassadors spoke in careful tones, measuring each word. The prince answered with composure, though she could see the fatigue in the way he set his knife down too slowly, his eyes drawn too often toward the chamberlain's stern figure at the far end. When the last course was cleared, the chamberlain rose. His voice, though polite, cut through the hall like a blade. "From tomorrow forward," he announced, "I will personally oversee all correspondence bearing His Highness's seal. No paper will leave this palace without my inspection." The words struck the table like thunder muffled in silk. Forks stilled, heads turned. The prince did not move, though his chest rose and fell once with force. Across the hall, the maid lowered her gaze to the polished floor, her heart thundering. The chamberlain's eyes found the prince, waiting for acknowledgement, for surrender. The hall, heavy with silence, waited with him. The prince's hand closed slowly around the stem of his glass. The maid, frozen at the far edge of the room, felt the floor tilt beneath her as though one wrong word could send them both tumbling into ruin. And then, the chamberlain's voice rang again, deliberate and final. "From tomorrow, Your Highness, every letter shall pass through my hands." The prince lifted his eyes to meet his. The hall held its breath. The maid's pulse hammered, knowing this decree threatened to uncover everything. The prince did not answer. Not yet. The chandeliers burned hot above the gathering, their crystal arms scattering fragments of light onto polished silver and glass. The great hall was filled with the murmur of multiple tongues, a steady tide of courtesy layered with rivalry. Ambassadors stood in their clusters, the colors of their ribbons and the cut of their coats, marking invisible borders within the same room. The prince walked among them with his measured grace. Each bow and nod was calculated, each word chosen for balance. His presence must reassure, must display command. But he knew the chamberlain's decree lingered in every whisper. The councilman's cold voice still echoed in the corners of his mind, a promise to place iron bars around his correspondence. He moved to greet the French envoy, an older man whose reputation for hauteur was almost theatrical. The envoy inclined his head stiffly, his pale eyes gleaming with the enjoyment of testing princes. The expected words of courtesy exchanged smoothly at first. Then the envoy's tone shifted, slipping into a phrase heavy with layered meaning. The prince's breath caught. He knew the phrase. He had practiced it under the maid's guidance that very afternoon. But now, before the envoy himself, the exact response, the subtle nuance, slipped from his grasp. His lips parted, then closed again. From the far side of the hall, he felt it before he saw it. Her nearness. The maid had taken her place among the servants carrying trays of wine. Her plain dress allowed her to move unnoticed, but her eyes were fixed on him with a clarity that pierced the blur of faces. She passed behind his shoulder, silent as a shadow. As she set down a glass, her voice brushed his ear, no louder than a breath. The correct response, perfect in accent, flawless in tone. He repeated it at once, turning the envoy's smile into an approving nod. Relief ran through him, hidden behind his steady expression. She was gone as quickly as she had come, her tray lifted again, her eyes lowered in feigned indifference. But others had seen. A baron at his side narrowed his gaze, his lips curling with speculation. Two ladies of the court whispered together, their fans trembling with sudden interest. The prince kept his stance calm, but every muscle in him tightened. The evening pressed on. The Italian minister was greeted, his hand shaken, his compliments returned with ease. The German representative engaged him in a brief spar over precedence, but again the maid passed within reach, her quiet presence steadying him. Her words slipped in like thread through a needle. Each time she saved him, each time he steadied himself by her voice, the room seemed to grow more alert. Courtiers' eyes began to linger longer than politeness required. Questions flickered at the edges of polite conversation. He felt the gaze of the chamberlain burning from across the hall, a weight he did not need to see to feel. He forced himself to speak with confidence, to keep the rhythm of a man who required no rescue. Yet beneath the veneer, his heart beat with the knowledge that without her, tonight would already be in ruins. The moment came when discretion cracked. The rival noble, a man who had long resented the prince's charm and the affectionate one, chose his strike with timing as sharp as a blade. He raised his voice above the murmur of the hall, his tone carrying just enough amusement to disguise malice. "Strange, is it not," the noble said, "that His Highness's words tonight seem to carry a certain echo, as if they were rehearsed in another's mouth before his own?" The ripple was immediate. Heads turned. The hum of conversation faltered. Every ear bent toward the insinuation. The prince's glass stilled in his hand. He did not look at the noble, not yet. He looked instead toward the line of servants along the wall. The maid stood among them, still as stone, her face lowered, but he saw the tremor in her hands where they gripped the tray. The noble let the silence grow heavy before adding, louder now, "A curious thing, to find learning in so low a place." His eyes darted toward the maid, deliberately, his smile cruel. Perhaps the prince receives his schooling from quarters none of us expected. The room froze. Fans lowered. Forks halted. Ambassadors glanced at one another, some intrigued, others offended, all hungry for scandal. The prince's head lifted. His eyes locked on the nobles, his jaw set, his entire posture commanding silence. Yet no words came. Not yet. Because he knew that anything he said might either save or ruin them both. The maid stood motionless, her tray heavy in her grip. the weight of 100 eyes pressing against her. Her pulse hammered so loud she feared the court could hear it. She could not move, could not breathe, could only wait for his choice. The chamberlain's lips curved in the faintest line of triumph. He had not spoken, but the decree announced at dinner now sharpened into an unspoken accusation. Every soul in the great hall waited. The chandeliers flickered with the tremble of their own heat. The room seemed to lean forward, ready to devour whatever answer came. And the prince still had not spoken. He set the glass down. The silence roared. The maid felt her knees weaken, and the noble's smirk widened, certain that his arrow had struck. All eyes turned to the prince. The prince inhaled slowly, preparing to speak, while the maid's heart pounded with dread of the words that might condemn her. But before his lips parted, the chamberlain took one deliberate step forward. The hall held its breath. The moment had come, and every gaze fixed upon the prince and the maid, bound together in suspicion. The noble's smirk lingered in the air like smoke after a torch, but the chamberlain's step forward pulled every gaze to him. He did not need to speak. The gesture alone carried judgment. It was enough to plant suspicion firmly where he wanted it. The prince raised his glass again, slow and deliberate, as though nothing had been said. He touched the rim to his lips, swallowed, and set it down with a sound just loud enough to break the silence. "A pity," he said at last, his voice even, "that some mistake eloquence for echo. A prince is not schooled, he commands." It silenced the hall for a moment, but the words were brittle armor. He knew it. So did she. The dinner moved on, course by course, but the air had shifted. Conversations that resumed were edged with curiosity, with laughter too quick, with glances that lingered too long on the prince, and then, discreetly, on the maid. She kept her face bowed as she carried trays, yet her every step felt weighed down by unseen hands pulling her lower. When the final toast had been drunk and the nobles filed out, the prince left without waiting for ceremony. His stride was measured, but tension pulled at his shoulders. Behind him, the chamberlain's gaze followed like a tether. In the servants' hall, she set down her tray and steadied herself against the wall. The laughter from above filtered faintly down through the beams, each note sharper than the last. She had known it was dangerous to stand so close, to let her knowledge serve him where others might see. But danger, once imagined, had become real tonight. Her hands trembled. She clasped them tight and whispered to herself, "You must not fall now." Later, in the dim corridor near the study, the prince found her waiting. His face was taut, stripped of princely ease, and the sight of him tightened the air between them. "You should not be here," she said. "You think I can leave you alone with this storm?" His voice was low, meant for her ears alone. "You cannot stop it," she answered. "Already they whisper. Already they wonder. If I remain near you, I will only confirm what they hunger to believe." He stepped closer, close enough that the candlelight carved the lines of fatigue under his eyes. "And if you vanish, then they will know. Absence is louder than rumor." Her chest ached at the truth of it, yet her pride pushed back. "Better they think I am no one than know I am someone." She faltered over the last word, knowing what she could not say. He searched her face as though her resolve were a locked door. His hand rose, stopped just before it might have touched her sleeve, then fell. "Do not leave me to fight blind." She drew a breath that felt like surrender. "And what will you fight with? My knowledge or me?" He did not answer. He could not, without breaking the silence that still protected them. Before either could speak again, the sound of deliberate steps filled the corridor. Both stiffened. The chamberlain emerged from the shadows, his expression carved from stone. He bowed with exactitude to the prince, then let his eyes rest coldly on the maid. "Your Highness," he said, "the council advises vigilance. Appearances must be guarded with more care than ever." His pause was sharp as a blade. "Every presence near you must now be weighed for consequence." The prince's reply was clipped. "I am capable of weighing." "Then you will understand," the chamberlain said, his tone a warning dressed as courtesy. "Why the servants must be ordered with stricter hand. Some places, some tasks, are not for them to touch." The prince's jaw locked. "I decide what is mine to order." The chamberlain inclined his head, but the satisfaction in his eyes betrayed him. "As you say, Your Highness, but the court will decide what it sees." When he turned and left, the silence that remained was worse than his words. The maid closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. "He is right," she whispered. "If I remain, it will ruin you. And if you go—" His voice broke its mask, a crack she had never heard before. "If you go, it will ruin me differently." Her throat tightened. She turned from him, walking swiftly down the corridor, before courage could betray her heart. The next morning, the palace was awake with whispers. In the servants' wing, she moved quietly, keeping her head low, but everywhere eyes followed her. Some were curious, others pitying, some sharp, with envy. She felt each gaze like a pin against her skin. At the same hour, the prince stood in council. Advisors pressed him with cautions, urging restraint, warning of how thin his reputation had become in a single evening. He listened with clenched fists behind his back, knowing that silence was safer than denial or defense. His mind was not with them. It was in the shadowed corridor where she had walked away from him. By afternoon, she had hidden herself in the smallest corner of the library, where no one looked for servants. Her eyes traced the spines of books she would never be permitted to touch, her body still and her thoughts restless. She wondered whether he would seek her. She prayed he would not, for his own sake. Yet the echo of his words remained. "If you go, it will ruin me differently." She pressed her face into her hands. For the first time since she had dared to reveal her gift, she wished it could vanish from her, wished she could return to dusting shelves and carrying trays, unseen, unheard, safe. But knowledge once spoken cannot be unsaid. The library door creaked. She froze, every nerve alert. Footsteps entered, slow, deliberate. On the table nearby lay a folded parchment, one she had not placed there. Its seal was absent, its ink fresh. Her heart lurched. She reached for it, hesitating, then opened it with trembling fingers. The words inside were written in a hand she knew, firm, elegant, princely. Yet the letter bore no name, no sign of the writer, but the shape of the script itself. It spoke of loyalty, of silence, of trust against the tide of rumor. Words only he could have written. Words that bound her to him as surely as chains. But as her eyes traced the lines, a colder thought cut through. What if the hand was not his? What if the letter had been planted, designed to expose her, to trap them both in a net woven of ink and lies? She folded it quickly, heart hammering, as the footsteps drew nearer. Her fingers shook as she pressed the parchment into her sleeve. And then the shadow of a man fell across her hiding place. The chamberlain's voice, calm and merciless, filled the library. "You should not be here." The chamberlain's figure stood in the library's half-light, tall and austere, his shadow cutting across the worn carpet. The maid straightened at once, hands folded to disguise their trembling, the hidden letter pressed against her sleeve like a brand on her skin. "You should not be here," he repeated, his tone precise, not loud, but shaped to leave no air around it. Her throat tightened. "I was ordered to tidy." "No," he said. His gaze slid to the empty table, to the untouched books, to the chair angled just enough to betray that someone had been sitting there. "You were hiding, and hiding is guilt." She lowered her eyes, but her silence betrayed nothing of the paper that burned against her arm. The chamberlain stepped closer, the quiet fall of his boots heavier than it should have been. "Do you know what men whisper?" His voice thinned. "That a maid carries the prince's words before the ink dries, that his eloquence is borrowed, that his honor is—" He stopped, as if savoring the edge of the insult. "Shared." Her breath caught. Those are lies. Lies? He raised a brow, the movement like the strike of a whip. Then show me. Show me your hands. Show me they do not hold what does not belong to you. Her arms stiffened at her sides. For a moment, silence threatened to crush her chest. To reveal the letter was to risk the prince's ruin. To refuse was to confirm suspicion. She swallowed hard. My hands are for service. Nothing else. He studied her, eyes narrowing. Then, with deliberate calm, he stepped back. I shall not tear your secrets here. But know this, your presence is noted. Every step you take is measured. And every glance you receive will be written down until the truth shows itself. He turned and walked away, his coat brushing the air like a final warning. The maid let out her breath only when the door closed. She pressed her palm against her sleeve, the parchment crinkling faintly beneath her touch. She had no time to think, no time to decide. The letter was a lifeline and a snare at once. She slipped from the library, her steps careful, her mind whirling. The prince found her in a narrow gallery overlooking the gardens, where cold glass framed the pale winter dusk. His presence startled her, yet she had known he would come. He always found her when the walls closed in. You left, he said, his voice strained. I had no choice, she answered. He saw me. The prince's hand brushed the sill, restless, as though the glass could not contain his anger. And? He suspects. He says every glance is counted. He says... Her voice faltered. He will not stop. The prince stepped closer. So near the cold from the glass seemed to retreat before his warmth. Let him suspect. Let him choke on his own vigilance. You are not guilty. Her eyes searched his. But am I safe? The question hung between them, heavier than any accusation. He looked at her sleeve, and she tensed, afraid he might guess the hidden letter. He did not ask. Instead, his voice dropped, almost breaking. You should never have been dragged into this. It is my failure. My pride. You speak as if I regret it. She lifted her chin, a spark of defiance breaking through her fear. I do not. I would not. His eyes caught hers and held them. The silence between them was sharp, dangerous, alive. 1,000 words threatened to rise, but neither dared let them escape. Then she reached into her sleeve. Her hand shook as she drew out the folded paper. She held it between them, the script visible only in flashes. This was left for me, unsigned, but it bears your hand. Or so I thought. He froze. His breath deepened. Slowly he took it from her, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second. He unfolded it, scanned the lines, and his eyes darkened. This is my hand, he said, but not my letter. Her stomach dropped. Then whose? He turned the page in his hand as if the ink itself would betray its author. It is a copy. A hand trained to mimic. Someone means to bind us in scandal. Someone close. The weight of the truth settled over them. She pressed a hand against the sill for balance. The Chamberlain. Or another, he said, though his eyes betrayed that he thought the same. This is bait. If you had kept it, if you had shown it, they would claim, he stopped, that we are already guilty, she whispered. The prince folded the letter, pressing it hard as if to crush the words. You trusted me enough to bring this. That alone will save us. She looked away, her throat tight. I trusted you because I had no one else. He moved closer, his voice fierce but low. And you never will need anyone else while I breathe. Her breath caught, but before she could reply, footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond the gallery. Heavy, deliberate, unhurried. The prince's eyes darted to the sound. He knew those steps. The Chamberlain. Without hesitation, the prince slipped the false letter inside his own coat. He turned toward her, his jaw set. Not a word. Leave the speaking to me. The door creaked open. The Chamberlain entered, his sharp gaze sweeping the gallery. His eyes flicked to the maid, then lingered on the prince's coat, as though he could see through the fabric. "Your Highness," he said smoothly, "I had not thought you would be here." "Then you should learn to think better," the prince replied, his voice cool steel. The chamberlain's mouth curved, not quite a smile. And yet, one wonders what brings a maid into the gallery at dusk, when courtiers gather elsewhere. The prince's hand pressed against his coat, where the letter lay hidden. He stepped forward, placing himself between the maid and the chamberlain. His voice sharpened, each word deliberate. "She is here because I willed it. That is all you need to know." The chamberlain's gaze hardened. "Your Highness risks much for so little." "No," the prince said, his eyes burning. "I risk little for much." The silence that followed was taut as a drawn bow. The maid's breath trembled in her chest. Then, without warning, the chamberlain stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper laced with triumph. "The council meets at dawn. Do you truly wish them to hear that the heir to the throne has given his voice to a servant?" The prince's jaw clenched, his eyes burned with fury, and the maid felt her knees weaken, knowing that the trap had nearly sprung shut. At that moment, the sound of hurried footsteps broke the silence. A guard's voice rang out from the corridor. "His Highness is summoned to the council chamber, immediately." The prince turned his head sharply, but the chamberlain only smiled thinly, as though the summons had been his own command. The maid's heart thundered. The chamberlain's eyes gleamed. The prince's hand closed over the hidden letter, as though the paper itself might be torn from him at any moment. And the guard's voice called again, urgent, "Your Highness, they are waiting." The summons rang down the corridor like a verdict. The prince did not move at once. He stood with one hand pressed against his coat where the false letter hid, the other gripping the edge of the gallery's sill as though it could anchor him. The chamberlain waited, calm, patient, the faintest shadow of triumph resting in his eyes. "Your Highness," the guard called again, closer now, his boots striking against the floor with urgency. The prince turned his head. "Tell them I will come." His voice was steady, but too steady, like a man who must control the tremor in his chest. The guard bowed swiftly and withdrew. Silence returned. Only the wind beyond the glass stirred, rattling faint branches in the winter garden. The chamberlain stepped forward, lowering his voice. "The council will ask questions you cannot silence. Better to surrender the servant before they demand it." The maid's pulse raced, but her voice did not waver. "I have done nothing to surrender." "Perhaps not," the chamberlain said, eyes narrowing. "But perception is enough. A crown cannot be defended by innocence alone." The prince cut him off sharp. "You will not dictate to me who stands beside me." The chamberlain bowed a fraction, mocking in its precision. "No, Your Highness. I merely prepare you for the dictates of others. You may defy me, but you will not defy the kingdom." He turned on his heel and left, his coat brushing the stone like a gavel's strike. The prince exhaled harshly, raking a hand through his hair. He looked at the maid, her hands clasped, her face pale but steady. "You should not have to bear this." Her voice broke the distance between them. "And yet I do." He stepped closer. His gaze softened, though his words did not. "If I enter that chamber alone, they will strip from me every thread of choice. They will write the story themselves, and you will be the villain in it." She drew in a slow breath. "Then let me leave before they can write it." "No." The refusal came like a blow. His eyes searched hers, unflinching. "If you vanish now, they will know you are the missing piece. They will imagine every word, every touch, whether true or not. They will make it worse." Her lips parted, but no sound came. The truth of it pressed too hard to deny. He moved toward the door, then stopped, his hand on the latch. "Stay here. Do not move until I return." "And if you do not return?" she asked quietly. He paused. His eyes closed for a heartbeat, then opened with the weight of command. "Then burn the letter." He left before she could answer. The maid stood in the gallery, alone, the cold glass reflecting her pale face. The folded letter's absence left her sleeve strangely light, but its presence against his chest was heavier than iron. She pressed her hand against her heart, then lowered it quickly, ashamed of the gesture. Time dragged. Footsteps echoed distantly through the palace corridors, some swift, some deliberate, each one making her start. The silence between them seemed louder. She paced the length of the gallery, then forced herself still. If any servant entered now, they must see only a maid on her duty, not a fugitive of suspicion. At last the sound came, the chamber doors opening, voices rising in the council hall below. She could not hear words, only the tone, stern, questioning, urgent. She closed her eyes, straining, as if her heart might translate what her ears could not. The door behind her opened. She turned sharply, expecting him. But it was the chamberlain. He stepped inside, his face set like a blade. "I warned him," he said, his voice low. "And he does not heed. So now I warn you. Leave while you still can. Take your silence and vanish before the tide consumes you." Her breath caught. "You wish me gone not for his sake but for your own?" His eyes hardened. "I wish order, and you are disorder. Remove yourself, and perhaps he may yet survive what is to come." She stared at him, her chest rising and falling with fury she had never dared to feel. Survive as what? A prince who hides behind fear, or a man who betrays those who save him? The chamberlain's lips pressed into a thin line. He turned as if to strike her with words, but stopped when hurried footsteps thundered from the far end of the corridor. The guard appeared again, breathless, urgent. "Summons for the maid," he said. His eyes flicked between them, uncertain. "By order of the council." Her knees weakened. "Me?" "Yes." The guard's tone was grim. "They demand your presence. Now." The chamberlain did not hide his satisfaction. "So be it." The maid felt her pulse crash in her throat. The council, the very place where her presence had been forbidden, now called for her like a witness dragged to the stand. The guard reached for her arm. The chamberlain stepped aside, his expression cold as stone. And she realized, with a jolt that emptied her breath, that in moments she would stand before the kingdom's highest eyes, with the false letter hanging like a sword over her head. The guard's grip on her arm was firm but not cruel, and the maid let herself be led through the corridors. The palace air was heavy, thick with the whispers that had grown since last night's dinner. Every servant she passed paused to look at her, some with pity, some with sharp curiosity. She kept her head bowed, each step a measured act of will. The chamber doors loomed ahead, tall and dark, their iron handles gleaming under the sconces. She could hear voices on the other side, low, resonant, insistent. The guard pulled the door open, and the sound swelled like a tide. The council chamber was a circle of authority. High-backed chairs surrounded a long table, its surface spread with papers and seals. The chamberlain stood at one end, his hands resting lightly on the wood, his posture filled with quiet victory. At the center, the prince stood alone. His eyes found hers at once. For a brief moment, everything else blurred away. The councillors turned as she entered. A dozen gazes fixed on her plain dress, her cap, her lowered eyes. The silence was suffocating. The chamberlain's voice broke it. "There is the servant who has been named in rumor. Let her stand before us, and let His Highness explain why she lingers at his side when state matters are at hand." The prince spoke, before she could draw breath. "She lingers because I will it, and because she has saved me." His tone was steady, his shoulders squared. He did not hide behind dignity. He wielded it. A murmur rose among the councillors. Some leaned forward in surprise, others exchanged sharp glances. The chamberlain's lips curved slightly. "Saved you, Your Highness? Then perhaps you will tell us from what." The prince lifted a letter from the table and held it high. From error, from insult, from disgrace before ambassadors who would judge us not only by armies, but by words. When my secretary fell ill, when no one else could guide me, this maid stepped forward. She speaks the languages you demand of me. She wrote with the precision I lacked. And because of her, letters went out that kept peace intact. The chamber buzzed with disbelief and shock. The chamberlain's voice sharpened. Then you confess you placed your crown's words into the hands of a servant? The prince met his gaze. I confess I placed them into the hands of wisdom. Would you rather I sent silence? Or worse, insults dressed as courtesy? The maid's chest rose and fell with unsteady breaths. She felt the eyes of the council upon her, measuring her worth against her station. Her hands shook, but she folded them tightly before her. An older counselor leaned forward, peering at her with narrowed eyes. Girl, speak. Is it true? Did you guide him? Her throat tightened. She looked at the prince. His eyes urged her to stand firm. She turned back to the counselor and said, steady though quiet, I only gave what I knew. I asked nothing in return. If that was wrong, then I am guilty. The room shifted with the weight of her humility. Several counselors exchanged glances, hesitant, unsettled. The chamberlain struck again. And if tomorrow she betrays what she has written, if her tongue, so quick in 9 languages, spreads secrets outside these walls, the prince's voice cut sharp. Then punish me, for it was I who trusted her. But you will not condemn her for what she has not done. The chamber fell silent. The counselors sat in uneasy stillness, waiting for someone to answer. It was the French ambassador who rose. He had been waiting in the gallery, summoned to speak on the letters received. His lined face held no expression as he stepped forward and laid one of the sealed documents on the table. This, he said, came to me signed by the prince. Its words were flawless, its courtesy exact. Its tone reminded me of France's honor without wounding mine. If such a letter was written by that maid, then I tell you plainly, I am grateful for her pen. The chamber rustled. Another ambassador stood, then another, each acknowledging letters they had received. Each praised their precision, their diplomacy, their craft. The chamberlain's jaw tightened, his argument slipping beneath the tide of foreign approval. The prince let the wave crest before he spoke again. His voice was calm, certain. You see now, I do not hide her because I am ashamed. I protected her because your suspicion would destroy what should be honored. I claim her help openly, and if it costs me something, then let it. I would rather be judged for truth than praised for a lie. The maid felt her breath catch. His words wrapped around her like a shield. Her eyes blurred, though she forced the tears not to fall. She had never imagined a world in which someone of his rank would speak so. Not for her. The chamberlain did not move. His lips pressed together, his silence louder than speech. At last, the eldest counselor struck the table with his hand. Then let it be said, the crown has not been diminished but strengthened. Let us speak no more of scandal. Let us speak of gratitude. One by one, the counselors nodded, though some reluctantly. The chamberlain inclined his head stiffly, hiding his defeat behind ceremony. The prince's eyes never left the maid. The moment stretched, full of weight and relief. When the session ended, the counselors filed out, their robes brushing the stone floor. The ambassadors bowed and departed. The chamber slowly emptied until only the prince and the maid remained. She stood near the door, her hands clasped, unsure if she should approach or vanish into the shadows where she belonged. He crossed the floor to her, each step measured, his face unreadable until he was close enough for her to see the exhaustion soften into something gentler. You should not have been called here, he said. His voice was low, almost breaking. I should not have spoken, she replied. But I could not remain silent. His hand hovered for a moment as though he meant to take hers, then fell back to his side. You have given me more than I deserve. And you, she whispered, her eyes glistening, have given me more than I ever dreamed." They stood in silence, the empty chamber vast around them. The fire in the grate had burned low, casting long shadows. Outside, the bells rang to mark the hour, their sound rolling over the city like a breath released. Neither moved, neither spoke. Yet in the stillness, something had shifted. The truth was no longer hidden. It had been spoken, seen, and left standing. For the first time, the maid felt not the weight of danger, but the fragile lightness of belonging. And the prince, watching her, knew he had chosen the only path left that would let him keep both his crown and his heart. He did not trust the quiet that followed. The chamber lay hollowed by the departure of robes and boots, the echo of voices still clinging to stone. He watched the door settle on its hinges, as if it might be tempted to open again and take back what it had just given. She stood near the paneling, hands folded, the habit of a servant surviving victory. The fire in the grate made a low breathing sound. Smoke laced the air with a sweetness that did not belong to war or pride. "Come," he said, his voice low, meant for them alone. "Not here." He did not take her arm. He did not dare. He turned and she followed, the hem of her dress whispering against the flagstones. The corridor outside the council chamber ran long and empty. The sconces along the wall burned steady, their light honest and unflattering. He kept his pace measured, not a flight, not a procession, so that any who saw would read only what he allowed them to read. They passed 2 footmen who looked away a heartbeat too late. A clerk bowed over a ledger and pretended to write the moment into harmlessness. The prince felt each witness like a small, sharp stone in his shoe and refused to limp. At the first turning he hesitated, weighing safety against breath. The study lay one way, the winter garden lay another. He chose the garden without counting reasons. Stone gave way to glass. The corridor cooled. He opened the door for her, and the damp air entered, clean and quiet. The long panes along the gallery had been veiled while the council sat. Now the lanterns were lit, little islands of gold floating in the dusk. The garden beyond held its own night, grass black-green, the bare branches of espaliered pears written against the sky. He stepped out onto the flagstones. The cold struck his face like clarity. "Will you walk?" he asked. She nodded. That was all. They went without speaking along the narrow path that followed the wall. The gravel under their feet made a modest sound, enough to prove they existed, and not enough to announce them. The lanterns left small circles of warmth. Between them, the darkness opened, soft and private. The prince's hand brushed the fold of his coat. He remembered the false letter hidden there, and the way the chamberlain's eyes had flicked toward his chest, as if he could smell ink through wool. He had meant to burn the trap. He would, not yet. "I should thank you," he said, when the silence had ripened and would accept words. "But it is too small." "You should not," she answered, and her voice carried the faintest tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. "You have already paid a price." "I paid a price I chose," he said. "There is a difference." They reached the curve of the path where a low stone bench turned inward to the garden wall. He stopped and rested one hand on the cool lip of stone. She stood opposite, the lantern's gold laying a soft circle on her collar, leaving her face in the thoughtful shadow that makes truth easier. "They will talk," he said. "They will talk whether you are near me or far. If you disappear now, they will call it guilt. If you stay, they will call it audacity." "What will you call it?" she asked. "Necessary," he said, "and right." A breath she did not know she had been holding left her chest. It turned to a ghost in the cold air and vanished. He reached into his coat. The false letter brushed his knuckles. He ignored it. From the inner pocket he drew a single sheet, folded twice to protect its face. It carried no seal. It needed none. He held it without yet offering it, as if to be sure it did not turn into the wrong page by some small treachery of fate. "What is it?" she asked, soft, as if the paper could be startled. "The first," he said. "The first you gave me. The first that taught my hand the right weight again." She frowned, unbelieving. "We sent. A fair copy left the palace," he said, "but the draft you formed." He opened the leaf in his hands, and the lantern light found the thin impress of corrections, the small shifts, the deliberate grace. "Stayed with me." "You kept it," she said, not as accusation and not yet as gratitude, a simple statement that asked why without asking. "I kept it," he said, and then, because he had never explained himself to anyone like this, to remind me of the exact moment my pride yielded to my duty and found out they were not enemies. He held it toward her. She did not reach. Her hands shook a little, and she seemed to fear marking the page with tremor. He stepped closer, bridging that last, careful space. When he placed the paper in her hands, the backs of his fingers brushed the inside of her palm. The contact was almost nothing. It shocked him, like heat after frost. She looked down at the page, and then up at him. "You mean to give it," she said, "not keep it." "It was mine by name," he said, "but it is ours by making." She held the sheet as if it might bruise. The lantern's flame made the ink shine, then dry again. She traced without touching the place where she had altered a verb and made courtesy keep its spine. He remembered how her voice had done it that morning. No, that earlier hour that felt a day ago, precise, soft, unafraid. "I do not know what to do with it," she said. "Keep it," he said. "When you doubt what you are, let it tell you." "And what is that?" she asked, the question naked of art. "Mine," he said before he could temper the word, and then he shut his eyes because the truth had leapt ahead of caution. Silence took them. In it he could hear a horse stamp somewhere beyond the hedge and a guard's cough swallowed by the wind. He opened his eyes slowly and did not apologize. "I have said it plainly now," he went on low. "Perhaps too plain for safety. I do not take it back." "Do you know what it costs?" she asked, steady. "To be that in the mouth of a prince?" "Yes," he said, "and no." He searched her face. "Tell me." He wanted the weight. He wanted the honest ledger. She moved her thumb along the paper's edge. "It costs me the shelter of unimportance," she said. "It costs you the ease of pretending. It costs us both the mercy of being forgotten." "Then we will not be forgotten," he said, as if choosing whether. "We will be remembered for the right thing." She almost smiled, the flicker that comes when a decision is close. "There are times when you make impossible sound like a road and not a wall." "It is a road," he said. "We put our feet on it this morning." She looked down at the paper again. "They will not permit me near the desk," she said. "Not now. Not when every eye is counting where I stand." "Then I will move the desk," he said, and the flash of stubborn humor softened the iron in his voice. "Or I will stand beside any desk you stand beside and make the eyes look away." "You cannot order eyes," she said, and he shook his head with the smallest hint of a smile. "No," he conceded, "but I can teach them shame." A gust of air slipped along the wall and fluttered the page in her hands. She trapped the corner with a gentle palm and stepped half a pace closer to him to spare it tearing. The movement brought her nearer than they had been all day, nearer even than the stolen moment at his shoulder when she had rescued him at the reception. Nearness remade the night. "Say it again," she said. "Not mine. The other." He understood. He folded his hands behind his back so that they could not reach for her without permission his body might not wait to receive. "Necessary," he said. "Right. And your pride," she said. "Where does that stand now?" "Beside me," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. At last, behaving. She took a slow breath and looked beyond him into the massed dark of yews. When she looked back, her eyes held more light than the lantern's. "You are a prince," she said. "You cannot do as you wish." "I have done more than I wished," he said. "I have done as I must." "And me?" she asked, the word very small and very brave. "What must I do?" "Stay," he said. Take what comes, beside me. She lowered her gaze. The paper trembled once, then stilled. Do not ask if you cannot hold me there when the asking brings heat. He leaned forward, not to touch, but to be touched by the fact of her. I asked them for that very heat today, he said. I asked it to land on me first, on my name. If there is more, I will ask it again. She lifted her face, and he saw the argument inside it end, quietly, as if it had tired itself, and lay down. You have a way of making promises sound like anchors, she said. They are, he answered. I have been drifting. She laughed then, low and brief, relief-shaped, and the sound made the cold gentler. You speak like a man who has discovered his own map. With your ink, he said. The wind moved the hedges again. He glanced at the nearest lantern and judged the oil. They had time still before a servant came to trim wicks and find them. He did not waste it. There is one more thing, he said, reaching for the first page with care. If you will bear it. She allowed him to take one edge. Their fingers made a bridge around the paper. He used the paper as excuse to stand truly close now, the span of a hand between them. He did not break the boundary. He let the boundary be the charge. Say it, she murmured. Tomorrow, he said, simple as bread, when the conference resumes, I will not put you in the shadows. You will stand where you can help me here. They will see. Let them decide they prefer the truth to a lie that keeps them comfortable. Her chin tilted in that familiar line of defiance and acceptance braided. If they do not prefer it, she said. Then they will learn, he answered, or they will choke. He smiled with his mouth shut, a flash of teeth pressed behind control. I am done apologizing for needing brilliance. And I, she said, lifting the paper so that it stood between their chests like a vow, am done pretending brilliance is a crime. He let go of the page. She held it now entirely, and he stood entirely with her. Stay, he said again, softer. Please. The word cost him. He let her see it. She nodded slowly. I will. He felt something he had held in iron all day loosen and turn into breath. He looked at the curve of her cheek in the lantern light and knew if he reached now and took her hand, he would be lost. And not lost. He did not reach. He took the moment into his chest and waited to be invited. She waited too. The air between them asked. It would be wrong, she said at last, small and clear, to thank you as a maid, thanks a prince. It would, he agreed. It would be right, she said, to thank you as one courage, thanks another. He let out a short, unsteady sound that might have been a laugh if it had not trembled. Then do. She did not bow. She did not step back. She stepped forward the inch left and let her forehead rest for one slow second against his shoulder, the place where a man's armor ends when he is unarmed. He closed his eyes and did nothing but stand, because to do more would be to take what had not been given. He felt her breath on the cloth of his coat, felt his own breath adjust to meet it. When she lifted her head, his restraint had grown roots. He looked down into her face and the question there. He did not answer with words. He offered his hand instead, open, palm up, between them, a court gesture remade into truth. She put her hand in it. There was no ceremony in that. There was the precise, unspectacular miracle of two bones meeting under two skins and deciding to remain. The lantern hissed softly, a tired sound. He glanced toward it and back to her. It is cold, he said, which meant you should not be kept standing in it. I have been cold before, she said, which meant I do not mind this kind. Come, he said, only a minute more. There is still something I must do. He drew her to the low stone bench and sat, leaving space between them, as if the space were a ribbon he meant to tie gently, not a gulf to conquer. He took the false letter from his coat at last, unfolded it, and held it near the flame. Proof, he said, and set the corner to the lantern's chimney until the paper caught. The flame licked up the page, hungry and orange, and then calmed into blue at the edges where ink burned darker. He did not let it drop ash on the path. He crumbled it in his hand until it was safe and dead. He brushed his palm clean. "Now there is only the one that matters," he said, nodding at the page in her hands. She looked at it, then at him. "Will you regret this?" she asked. "Tomorrow, or the day after, when the world presses back." "I will regret only that I waited until today," he said. "And if it hurts," she said. "Then it will be a true hurt," he answered. "Better than the slow ache of pretending. I have had enough pretending to last a reign." She sat very still for a long breath. In that stillness, the garden lost some of its cold. She turned the page over and pressed it flat against her chest, the way one holds a shield that also happens to be a heart. "I would have been content," she said. "Once, with no one seeing." "You lie," he said gently. She smiled with her eyes. "I do." The wind eased. Somewhere a hinge groaned. He became aware again of the structured world a few yards away. The patrols, the clocks, the people who would measure their steps. He did not resent it as much as he had an hour ago. He had something he could set against it now. "We should go in," he said, "before the lanterns are tended." "Very well," she said, and stood. He rose with her. He did not let her hand go until the path narrowed. When it did, he released it slowly, not because he must, but because the letting go could itself be dignified. At the door he stopped, and looked at her as if to set her image where he could keep it when they could not stand like this. "When it grows hard," he said, last words before walls, "remember this light. And when it grows easy," she said, "do not forget what it cost." "I will not," he said. They stepped into the corridor. The air shut around them with its old, obedient chill. A page turned a corner and stopped short, eyes wide. The sight of a prince and a maid walking together, a puzzle his training could not solve. The prince inclined his head, and the boy remembered to bow. "Send to the study," the prince said, mild, as if the night had done nothing unusual to him. "Ask that a small fire be lit." "Yes, your highness," the boy said, and ran. They walked on. At the door of the study he paused and let her pass first, the courtesy a small rebellion disguised as habit. The room smelled of ash and paper. He shut the door and the quiet came back, welcome as a friend. "Sit," he said. "We will plan what can be planned." He smiled, a real thing that touched the corners of his eyes. "And leave the rest to courage." She nodded and took the chair beside the desk instead of behind it, and he took the other, and the space between them was now the right size for two people who had chosen the same road. He set a clean sheet before them both and uncapped the inkwell. "Tell me," he said, pen in hand, "what shall we say to the morning?" She leaned forward, her shoulder almost touching his, the warmth of her presence a quiet, steady flame. And together, under the soft crackle of the newly kindled fire, they began to write a future that did not apologize for either of their names. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.